Deep diving into the lore of Arknights can be an intimidating challenge. The extent of Arknights' world building is quite insane. Although the focus of the main story are our trials and tribulations in the pharmaceutical company Rhodes Island, we do not exist in a vacuum. There's an entire world out there that we interact with and who interact with each other, with their own histories and far-reaching consequences. This is where we see the operator factions. Although Rhodes Island does have its own team, we do enlist help from others. They can represent countries, corporations, or even independent groups, each one having their own goal, which we help them with as Rhodes Island. Because of this, we can say that the people who work in the same faction tend to synergize with one another, whether it be from playstyles or through passive effects. It's a reflection of their relationship with one another, where they came from the same culture or have the same goal. However, one faction stands far taller than the others, the Abyssal Hunters, arguably the most powerful faction from the pure synergy between the units, the faction whose storyline ties with the Arknights equivalent of Lovecraftian eldritch horrors. Now, we can always say it's faction favoritism, but is it really? Is there perhaps a reason why the Abyssal Hunters are so powerful? What could be the possible lore explanation for their extreme synergy and strength? And what does this imply for the future of Terra? Hello everyone! Rosa Bells here, and in this video we're going to answer those questions, but in order to do that, we're going to have to take a look at the history and the inception of the Abyssal Hunters, the current roster of members, some of their offshoots, and more importantly, the connection of all this to their gameplay. Welcome to part 1 of the Lore and Ludonarrative analysis of the Abyssal Hunters, focusing on the faction itself. Usual warning, spoiler alert for Undertide, Stultifera Navis, Path of Life, and IS-3. This will also cover some lore from the books Terra, A Journey, and the Arknights official artworks Reset Volume 1, as well as some info from a bunch of operator files, records, and modules.
When you finally made the long journey through the dark, up to the water's surface, your eyes dazzled by the sparkling stars all over the sky, your cheeks soothed by the cradling waves, your tears seep into your mouth. They have the same salty taste of your home. Compared to all that, the bathtub at Rhodes Island is so tiny and puny. I'll have to show you my home someday.
In order to understand the Abyssal Hunters, we must first understand the history of the country they came from, Aegir. The name is based off of the personification of the sea in Norse mythology pronounced Aegir, but the English VAs call it Aegir, so we'll stick to that. Inspired by the legend of Atlantis, Aegir is a country that resides underneath the vast ocean just south of the coastlines of Iberia and Higashi. Their people, also called Aegir, generally represent fishes or aquatic animals, and the traits are seen in their art. They are all proficient swimmers, but only a select group of them can breathe underwater, meaning only this subsection of Aegir can live in the ocean. Those who could not end up on the coasts of Iberia and Higashi as islanders, eventually migrating into the rest of Terra, which is why we can now find Aegir people in places like Colombia. They do share the constant need to be moisturized though, and they get dehydrated pretty easily. The underwater Aegir also pride themselves a lot in singing and dancing, which I'm assuming is inspired by how whales and other aquatic animals sing to each other in order to communicate, or how fishes maneuver around and move in schools. So there are a lot of records that talk about how they would casually sing to one another, and even a testament from an operator fawning over how Gladia dances in her promotional record. As a country, Aegir is considered a confederate technocracy, where each city of Aegir is ruled by their own consul, with the consuls agreeing on the direction each city will work towards, and these consuls are people with specific skills and expertise. In Gladia's file, she explains that there are two types of consuls, science and technology. In a technocracy, that means that the consul leaders are full of scientists and engineers, which lead to the advanced technology of the Aegir. In Arknights, they further explain this advancement in technology due to the early Aegir finding technology left over by the predecessors, aka the race of Doctor and Priestess. Having early access to such technologies accelerated their own and emphasized its importance for the future generations of Aegir. It is also revealed that there is no originium in the ocean, so oripathy is very rare amongst the Aegir race, and it does not exist at all to those who come from the ocean. Aside from Spectre, who is a special case that we will discuss later, they have all been observed to not only have 0% infection, but their blood originium crystal density is also their record lowest, though trace amounts of the infection can be attributed to the fact that it is believed that the ancient Aegir race started in the land and just evolved into living underwater. This can also contribute to their advancement because while everyone else is focused on managing catastrophes and dealing with the effects of aridity, especially with the socio-political effects of this, the Aegir were free of those issues so they can just put their focus in other projects. Now, due to how advanced they were compared to the land dwellers, the Aegir see the other nations as primitive, and so they decided to just never interact with them. Why would they? While the other countries were still developing in their tribal and feudal stages, not yet even thinking about nomadic cities, the Aegir have already explored most of the known sea and were already thinking of interstellar travel. Note, this is hundreds of years before the events of Lonetrail, aka the event where we go to space. That's how advanced they were. This lack of interaction with the land dwellers led to the general belief across Terra that the Aegir country was nothing more than a legend, an old wives' tale of something in the ocean. The Aegir didn't care, they were leagues and centuries ahead of everyone else. Instead, they put their focus into exploring more of the ocean and focusing their research on reaching further beyond. However, this arrogance and isolationism eventually proved itself to be their downfall, when a fateful expedition in the deep awakened something dangerous.
Calcit encouraged me to seek your help, though I still remain skeptical of its utility. The technology of land dwellers is primitive compared to that of Aegir, yet the average mental state is even more problematic. Fear and cowardice seem to pervade most of you. Honestly, I cannot imagine how you people would face that.
The predecessors didn't just leave some technology behind. They left behind some of their own experiments as well. This includes something in the sea. As we grow to learn in Arknights, the predecessors were working on various ways to preserve their lives from an oncoming threat from above. This is what led to the creation of Originium in the first place. However, that was not their only experiment. Another thing they tried doing was to capture and experiment on Pherenmuts, who are basically godlike beings that are considered technically immortal. Some examples of Pherenmuts that we know of is Sui, before he was fragmented into the 12 siblings, Kiergander, who is hiding as her operator Kiera, and the boss of the Chongyue event, Yan. And there's also Sammy. The captured Pherenmuts underwent some sort of biological reverse engineering and re-engineering in order to utilize their divine powers and their ability to hold life inside them. The idea was to create a living ark inside of these immortals to carry a terraforming species called Seaborn. After the world is consumed by Originium, the project made by Priestess and Oracle, aka us, the idea was to release the Seaborn to consume and clean up the Originium and then terraform the world into a fertile one. These living arks were called the Firstborn, and it is from them that the other Leviathans and Seaborn are created. Of course, we later learned that after all of this was set up, disaster struck, and even if the plan worked, the predecessors wouldn't have been able to return. But that's another story. Why are we talking about this? Well, an Aegirian expedition headed by a scholar named Martus led them to the Mantle Ruins, which was an abandoned predecessor complex. Since they got their initial technology from the predecessors, it made sense that the Aegir wanted to discover even more. However, while stuck in the labyrinth of the complex, Martus, who lost his steam over the journey, came across one of these living arks hibernating. The firstborn is Sharmla. When Martus came into contact with it, he was overloaded with visions of the threat of the above that the predecessors were to die from and the destiny of the Seaborn to consume everything on Terra. Isharmla offered one of its cubs to be eaten by Martus, and he assimilated into the Seaborn hive mind called the Many. Although his body turned into a Seaborn, he miraculously kept his human mind. However, he had become loyal to the Seaborn and their goal, and so he released the Seaborn, allowing them to escape and spread across the ocean where they made contact with the Aegir. At first, the Seaborn were seen as nothing more than annoying pests, like little cockroaches that just popped up but caused little to no harm. There were even reports that some Seaborn were washed up on the shore and collected as little trinkets by the Iberians. However, Martus, who was thought to be dead at the time, started a cult known as the Church of the Deep, whose ultimate goal is to assimilate all life into the Seaborn and bring about peace in Terra. After all, you can't have conflicts if all of you are of the same hive mind. Now remember, the Seaborn were originally created to eat Originium after everything was already crystallized and then leave, and all that will be left is an empty fertile world where the predecessors can start over. The Seaborn released from Marta's expedition were released far too early. There was still too much life already in the world, and not to mention, they were released underwater, with the Aegir, the most advanced nation in Terra at the time. This would prove to be the worst case scenario, because the Seaborn were not like the Aegir, who are individual people. They were a hyper-adaptive species who can learn and mutate easily to overcome obstacles, and with a hive mind, their growth was exponential. Within a matter of months, the Seaborn turned from pests into a destructive force that could wipe out Aegirian cities. Remember, the Church of the Deep was also working in the shadows to make this process smoother. Some Aegir were forced to leave the water and come onto the land, where they tried to warn the Iberians about the oncoming danger, and they attempted to find solutions to the Seaborn problem. But at this point, Iberia was in the middle of its golden age, having achieved ocean-nomadic cities and with the boom of technology from the islander Aegirs. Not to mention, they were still technologically inferior compared to that of the Aegir, so not only do they have no means to help the Aegir, but they brushed off the Seaborn problem because to them, the Seaborn were trinkets, toys, and decorations, which was propaganda spread by the cultists of the Church of the Deep, who hid amongst the Aegirian refugees. And honestly, who would you rather listen to when you're in an age of prosperity? Tales of doom or of cute sea creatures? We've seen this attitude in real life, from Babylon to Rome to Egypt. None of the world powers, at their peak, ever see their own destruction. They would never see what would cause their downfall. For Iberia, that downfall happened with a profound silence, when a giant tsunami submerged half of Iberia under the water, so sudden and so fierce that none of the Iberians could even make a sound. With the land dwellers submerged, they were assimilated into the many and gave them another boom of evolution. And with the Eye of Iberia destroyed, all possible communication with Aegir was no more. You can physically see the damage done to Iberia in the map. Look at that! Doesn't it look like the ocean tried to eat Iberia? The jagged lines almost look like bite marks. And if that's not enough, the infestation was becoming worse and worse. Back in Aegir, many propositions for a way to destroy or quell the Seaborn surfaced, but one we'll focus on in particular was suggested by a consul named Oculatus. This was way back when the Seaborn crisis just started and they were just starting to become a problem for Aegir cities. He suggested that only by genetically modifying their people into perfect beings can they have the strength to fight back the Seaborn. This was rejected because it went against the very humanistic value of the Aegir. A person is not just some robot you can switch the parts of as you please. His idea was shut down and ignored, and Oculatus resigned as a consul, eventually succumbing to a disease that he had. But desperate times call for desperate measures, and when you are cornered by eldritch horrors beyond your imagination with the extinction of all life on the horizon, morality and principle goes out the door. You do anything to survive. So, despite the hang-ups the Aegir had on genetically modifying their own people, they acknowledged that it is a way to fight back against the Seaborn. Maybe, just maybe, it could work. And so, 200 years after it was first suggested, the bioengineering of Aegir was greenlit. And thus we have...
No need to arrange a meeting. I have already ascertained the status of the other hunters. Please continue to monitor their health and help them keep their heads clear. I will return and check. As Aegir's first Abyssal Hunter, I hope that I will not be its last.
As the saying goes, if you can't beat them, splice parts of their genetic pool and enhance your own people with them. That doesn't roll off the tongue. But basically, to beat the Seaborn, we must become partially like the Seaborn. the creation of the Aegir Seaborn hybrid. That is the overarching theory that governs the appropriately named Abyssal Hunter program. Get it? They hunt the things that came from the abyss? Abyssal Hunter? Yeah, whatever. Of course, they don't add enough Seaborn genes to be assimilated into the many, just enough to enhance one's fighting capabilities. Think of it as Aegirian super soldiers, except created with gene splicing instead of super serums. Ulpianus, who was a consul of technology and who became the lead researcher for the Abyssal Hunter program, volunteered as its first test subject when the program reached its clinical stage. If it worked on him, then he can make it work on others. Whether he did it out of responsibility or worry, we do not know. Typically, this does not mean a good thing. The "I will experiment on myself" researcher trope usually ends in not good ways. Luckily, that did not happen in this case, mostly attributed to the already advanced technology of the Aegir. But his success did come with a few curveballs. Ulpianus is described to have so many cuts and lacerations all over his body that the Rhodes Island medical team has described him as an operating table, which explains why his body is covered from head to toe in his art. Still, because of his success, the Abyssal Hunter program moved forward, and select Aegir were chosen from the entire population regardless of status and position in order for them to become Abyssal Hunters. Some even volunteered, having lost their cities and families to the Seaborn, and were allowed to participate if they passed assessment. All Abyssal Hunters post-procedure share similar traits, such as white hair and red eyes, which indicates a successful merge with the Seaborn, as well as outstanding strength, speed, and endurance, in order to fight against their powerful enemies. They are each armed with a quote-unquote primitive or a tier 1 weapon, which emphasizes their physical strength, and it also helps them prevent the Seaborn from learning new technology. They trained hard, deep diving in trenches and destroying nests, constantly improving themselves and finding out how far their new limits can go. Of course, this wasn't widely accepted by the other Aegir, and the Abyssal Hunters weren't trusted. And it was correct of them to fear these hybrids, because even though they managed to merge the two species successfully, the Abyssal Hunters were also susceptible to succumbing to their Seaborn side, so the military was constantly on alert around them. Which, to be fair, is a big deal, so even the Abyssal Hunters were trained to keep tabs on one another and to immediately spot when someone is succumbing to their Seaborn side. They have their own methods, but Ulpianus gives us some insight on one of his methods to check this.
There's no point in staring at it. Aegir's musical notation would be unfamiliar to you land dwellers. I make it a habit to compose a song before battle, and I ask my teammates to memorize it. Once the battle is over, they are to sing it with utmost accuracy. The Seaborn have no taste for artistry, so it has proved a useful test.
For the Abyssal Hunters, to become a monster is worse than death. After years of preparation and after locating Isharmla and the Leviathan nest, all 4 squads of the Abyssal Hunters were sent down to eliminate it. And they failed. Well, to be fair, they did manage to execute a large amount of the Seaborn and Leviathans, and a squad managed to get to Isharmla and kill it, but at the cost of all the lives of the Abyssal Hunters in the process. Aegir, after realizing what happened, ultimately shut down the Abyssal Hunter program, deeming it as a beneficial step forward but was ultimately a failure. And just like that, the Abyssal Hunters were completely annihilated. Or were they?
You chose a dangerous way to learn of the Abyssal Hunters and our enemies, Doctor. With nothing but your delicate body, the tides will drown you. But at the same time, you can count your lucky stars. Because I invite you to hide behind me.
5 years after the supposed annihilation of the Abyssal Hunters, they returned. Well, a few of them. Skadi, who survived after becoming a vessel for Isharmla, though we'll talk about that in another video, ended up on the shore and became a bounty hunter, keeping away from anything that could possibly trigger her Seaborn blood. Laurentina, who we know as Spectre, when she was washed up after the failed mission, was captured by the Church of the Deep and experimented on, injected with enough liquid originium to wipe out several cities. She contracted orypathy from this, which drove her insane to the point of believing that she was some psychopathic nun by the time she was rescued. She eventually overcame this to become her altar. Gladia was heavily injured and woke up marooned somewhere in an undisclosed location, and she picked herself up despite being covered with blood and injuries to return to Aegir and search for other survivors. And Olpianus, who actually witnessed the moment when Skadi merged with Isharmla, ultimately he decided to keep to the shadows and discovered the infiltration of the Church of the Deep in the Aegir console. Again, just to be clear, I will be focusing on the characters as members of the faction in this video and will deep dive into each individual character in future parts. This specific section is also covering the hunters that are part of the Abyssal Hunter program, and we'll discuss the offshoots, which includes Andreana, calm down, in the next chapter. These 4 operators join us now with the goal of receiving support from us to deal with the Seaborn, and with the operators in our files, we can now see for ourselves the results of the Abyssal Hunter program. All 4 of these operators share the traits we described in the previous section. They all have white hair and red eyes, they each carry a tier 1 or a simple weapon like a giant sword for Skadi, a hacksaw for Spectre, a giant lance for Gladia, and a whole 4-pronged anchor for Olpianus. With their files, we can also see their amazing combat abilities, usually in the realm of outstanding and excellent, with Skadi and Gladia even breaking the scales for physical strength and mobility respectively. Interestingly, they also all share a flawed score for Originium Arts Assimilation, which is especially interesting for Spectre because she does have Oripathy after being injected with pure Originium, and generally, those with Oripathy have a higher affiliation with Originium Arts. Now we'll get back to that later, but for the others, this follows what we discussed before. This is because Originium is not found in the oceans, and so without having it in their system, it makes sense that they cannot use Originium Arts. It's actually not a completely unique trait to the Abyssal Hunters, as all the Aegir who came from Aegir, at least the underwater Aegir, also have the same assessment. Now, getting back to Spectre's case, this actually gives us a bit more insight because even with the high percentage of infection, she doesn't show the physical signs of infection, she doesn't have crystals all over her body, and she cannot do Originium Arts. We can attribute this to her Seaborn blood because remember, the original intention for the creation of the Seaborn was to eat Originium once the world had been consumed by it. This explains the lack of Originium in the oceans and Spectre's resistance to it. Basically, in exchange for no Oripathy, the Aegir get Lovecraftian eldritch horrors, so I guess that's fair? What this also implies is that the Abyssal Hunters can only deal physical damage, but a lot of it. Yes, I know, Gladia's skill 3 can do arts damage as well as Spectre Altar's substitute, but we'll explore the implications of that when we get to their respective videos. I am not covering that here. Now, another interesting thing about the Abyssal Hunters is that they share a very common weakness, and that is the fact that they cannot fight against aerial enemies. Skadi, Olpianus, and Spectre are firmly ground units, with the only person whose attacks can hit aerial units being Gladia. This can be attributed to the fact that she holds a giant lance, so it's kinda like she's poking the enemies in the sky, but even then, it's only in her very short attack range, so it's very limited and not reliable. This makes sense though, because the Abyssal Hunters were trained to fight in the water, and when you're swimming around, there are technically no aerial units. You're swimming. Why would you need to fly? If an enemy flutters above you, you can just swim up. So having soldiers who specialize in aerial enemies just doesn't make sense for Abyssal Hunters. It checks out. Now, let's take a deeper look at one of the aspects that make the Abyssal Hunters such a prominent faction in gameplay. Their faction buffs. I should take this time to first say that the Abyssal Hunters are powerful on their own, as individuals. They each have their own use cases, with perhaps Olpianus being the most general use friendly, which makes sense because he was the first Abyssal Hunter, so he would be more independent compared to the others. In their records, our other operators have reported the terrifying feats of each Abyssal Hunter on their own, often claiming they are like monsters and how they are very relieved that we have the Abyssal Hunters on our side rather than as enemies. However, the true strength of the Abyssal Hunters come out when they are together. The idea of the Abyssal Hunters were mostly conceptual up to this point, but with these operators with us, we can now see the terrifying implications of their origins. Because of the fact that they have the genes of a Seaborn, it means that they share certain traits. Like I said before, they adapted the strength, speed, and endurance of the Seaborn, but there was another trait that they inherited. the hive mind of the Seaborn. Now, in the lore, it is said the Abyssal Hunters work in groups, and you can think of it as a strategy thing. Always have backup, have someone cover you, strength comes in numbers, blah blah blah. But perhaps the hive mind of the Seaborn manifests in a way that they become literally more powerful when they're working together. This is where the Abyssal Hunter buffs come in. Each operator in the Abyssal Hunter faction contributes to the whole, just as how each Seaborn contributes to the many. Yes, these operators are strong on their own, but only when working together can they achieve near monstrous heights. We have Skadi, someone described by our own operators as a walking catastrophe, who gives attack and HP with her talent Abyssal Predator. 5-star Spectre had lost her mind due to the experiments, so she doesn't contribute anything at first, which represents her mental separation from the group, even though she still receives their buffs. Although with her X module, where she starts remembering who she was by a candlelight, she gives additional damage to the team, which reflects her mad need to hack at things with her saw. But this shows how even a sliver of connection to her team can help her contribute. And when she regains her sanity and becomes her alter, Spectre the Unchained, her contribution is no longer hidden in a module, and instead it becomes her talent, Aegir's Depths, where her love for artistry and how she carries the legacy of the old culture of Aegir supports her fellow hunters with an HP boost and an SP boost. Gladia, as one of the leaders of the Abyssal Hunters, protects and encourages the others with her talent, Waves of Aegir, where she reduces the damage that they take and helps them heal HP per second. And Olpianus, with his talent Nourish the Blood, contributes base attack and HP whenever he kills, which reflects how he is the first Abyssal Hunter, the base of which the other Abyssal Hunters are built upon. Thus, he gives the base from which all of the multipliers of the other skills add up. With this massive amount of power in our disposal, you have to admit it makes you feel almost godlike that you can ultra buff your own units just by having them in your squad. But on the flip side, it gives us a dire warning. This is the power we receive from only a handful of Abyssal Hunters. However, we recall that 4 squads of Abyssal Hunters were tasked to fight Isharmla and the Leviathan Nest, and they failed. How powerful were they together with that much Abyssal Hunter synergy? And they failed? It's no wonder the Seaborn is considered one of the greatest threats on Terra. It's no wonder why the Aegir stopped all progress in their advanced society to redirect all efforts into fighting this threat. It's no wonder why such monstrous beings like the Abyssal Hunters had to be created in the first place. It's no wonder why there are a subgroup of people who choose to side with the Seaborn instead. Speaking of the Church of the Deep, they weren't idle during all of this.
That special collaborator of yours is just something other right now, using biological function to imitate his old form. And you should know that better than him. You're still seeking possibilities in him? I hope you aren't repeating my mistakes.
The advantage of infiltrating the Aegir console is that you gain access to some top secret information, like, let's say, the Abyssal Hunter Project. Martus, who is arguably the most organic Aegir Seaborn hybrid, made it one of the goals of the Church of the Deep to create similar hybrids to that of the Abyssal Hunters, but instead of having more Aegir than Seaborn traits, he wanted these hybrids to be more Seaborn than Aegir. A few of these hybrids have actually made it to our roster. We have the 4-star Deep Color, who summons little Seaborns, aptly called Tentacles, to fight for her, but who ultimately rejected being part of the many because the Seaborn can't appreciate art. She fabricated a story about her coming from a rich family in Colombia and then studying art, but Rhodes Island found inconsistencies with this. However, she was still allowed in due to special considerations. Interestingly, she's the only Aegir Seaborn hybrid who can use Originium arts proficiently. Perhaps this is due to her summoning Seaborns to use in battle versus having the Seaborn enhance her own abilities, especially since she claims to use Originium in her paints. We also have the 5-star Highmore, who we met in IS-3, whose family was falsely accused of being part of the Church of the Deep. Her father was killed by the Inquisition, with her mother dying from depression shortly after. She was ostracized and bullied and was almost burned at the stake like some sort of witch when she was saved by Cierco, a bishop of the Church of the Deep. She then agreed to become part of the church and the Seaborn. Highmore actually does end up transforming fully into a Seaborn during the events of the first ending of IS-3, but was ultimately saved by Mizuki. She still shows signs of being a Seaborn though due to the scales on her body, but she has retained her human mind when she joined Rhodes Island. And speaking of Mizuki, he's another Aegir Seaborn hybrid found and created by Cierco. He was taught how to cook and he became a prominent chef, which is why we met him in the Dociles summer event with Chen Alter for the cooking competition. However, the reason why he was taught this way was because Cierco made him a hybrid by feeding him food that contained Seaborn cells. In reality, Mizuki is mostly Seaborn at this point, though he retains his human mind and body. He also became the vessel of Izumik de Caerula Arbor, though Cierco did this with the hope that the Seaborn could learn to coexist with the Terrans. This is basically why the whole of IS-3 happens. It should be noted that these operators are not considered part of the Abyssal Hunter faction, mostly because of the fact that they are not from the same program, but also because their hybridization is different. Like I said before, they are made to be more Seaborn than Aegir. However, there is one Church of the Deep experiment that did make it to the ranks of the Abyssal Hunters. Andreana. She doesn't have the trait of the typical Abyssal Hunter, no white hair and red eyes. Her weapon was a self-made sniper rifle inspired by the Lateranos, although it works like a crossbow rather than a gun, shooting ink blots. A simple weapon, but it is an aerial weapon, which doesn't fit the methods used by the other Abyssal Hunters. Her physical strength is lacking in comparison, but she shares their flawed Originium arts assimilation. The fact that she's part of the Abyssal Hunter faction, though, implies that she shares enough compatibility with the Abyssal Hunters in order to join their quote-unquote hive mind. Thus, she is able to benefit from the presence of the other Abyssal Hunters. This is not like 5-star Spectre, though, whose mind was completely severed from the hive. Andreana's talent, Abyssal Intuition, contributes to the hive mind immediately, even without a module. In fact, her module, which improves this talent, talks about how when she sees the other Abyssal Hunters, she feels a physiological reaction. She described it to us as love at first sight, albeit jokingly. But I think this showcases her deep connection to the others, despite never having met them before. This module also talks about her vague memories of being experimented on by a robed Iberian surrounded by the smell of the sea, which confirms how she was taken in by someone from the Church of the Deep. Now, because of her difference in her inception as a hybrid and the fact that she's not from the same program as the others, she doesn't contribute much to the Abyssal Hunter hive mind. I mean, look at her contribution. At full potential, with her module at level 3, she gives a whopping plus 22 attack speed. It's not nothing, we have to admit that much, but it's definitely minuscule compared to the rest of the hunters. So much so that the other Abyssal Hunters don't know of her existence, nor feel a pull towards her compared to how she feels towards them. And if we look at it in a meta-narrative perspective, even us players tend to forget that she's part of the Abyssal Hunter squad. I myself am guilty for the fact that if I'm bringing the Abyssal Hunter squad and I need to cut someone out for any reason, my first cut will always be Andreana. I'm sorry. Speaking of offshoot Abyssal Hunters, a little trivia. Apparently in the closed beta version of Arknights, Blue Poison was listed as an Abyssal Hunter. This was changed in the official release, obviously, but could you imagine what might have been? Abyssal Hunter Blue? Anyway, these are currently all the Aegir Seaborn hybrids running around. The question now is, what's next?
Am I sick? Or am I still dreaming? I dreamt that the black sky was our ocean. When the others and I swam up, we did not feel ourselves sinking at all. Strange. So strange. Is this our future? Their faces are so blurry. They... No.
As of posting this video, the last update we had was during Path of Life, where the Aegir finally managed to connect with the rest of Terra and broadcast their call for help, warning them of the danger of the Seaborn that is now encroaching the whole of Terra. The storyline of the Abyssal Hunters is not yet finished, far from it. We can, however, infer what's going to happen based on what we learned so far and with a bit of imagination. It was revealed in IS-3 that Isharmla is not the only firstborn. There are 4 of them in total, and in the direction we're going, each firstborn is going to be assimilated with an Aegir Seaborn hybrid. Currently, 2 of them are in our roster of operators. We have Isharmla, the Corrupting Heart, representing Migration, who is in Skadi. We have Izumik, the Caerula Arbor, representing Growth, who is in Mizuki. Now, how about the other 2? At the end of Path of Life, Ulpianus sinks to the bottom of the ocean with Martus and is led into the nest of the firstborn. With this, it is heavily implied that Ulpianus is on his way on becoming the vessel of the primordial lifespring, representing survival. We can even see that this is part of Ulpianus' plan in one of his voice lines.
The Seaborn issue is already out of our control. If a single waterway or several battles could annihilate them, I would not be here seeking your cooperation. I should be off now. Stay in contact. Become one of them, then uncover their fatal weakness from within. This is the only way.
This leaves the never-ending Glacier, representing Reproduction, who I'm guessing might merge with Gladia because hello, mommy! I'm kidding. This is because if my prediction of Ulpianus is true, then she would be the last 6-star Aegir Seaborn hybrid that can be used as a vessel. That's it. With all 4 firstborns assimilated with operators, this will likely lead us to the climactic big bad of the Seaborn storyline. And at the end of the line, who will rise up to save us from the great silence? Andreana. Hear me out, stop, wait, let me explain. As we discussed before, Andreana seems to be a failed Abyssal Hunter created by the Church of the Deep, and yet she has just enough compatibility with them to benefit from their faction capabilities without sharing the typical Abyssal Hunter faction traits. This means she has just enough separation from the other Abyssal Hunters that if anything happened to them after the assimilation of the firstborns, she is most likely going to be able to retain her individuality. So my prediction is that at the end of the road, Andreana Alter is going to be our savior from the Seaborns. Now, I can't be completely unhinged about this because there's an equal chance that HG is just going to introduce a new character to Deus Ex Machina the Seaborn. We might even get a Spectre Alter and some lore that her infected blood made her into a super soldier. But won't it be the funniest and most poetic thing that Andreana, the arguably most forgotten of the Abyssal Hunters, the one who does the smallest contribution to the faction, ends up saving the world? RKO out of nowhere! Andreana with a steel chair! I'm probably wrong, but if I'm right, I'm claiming this as my Markiplier honey moment. So until then, I'll be holding back from doing an Andreana part until her altar comes out, or if there's no hope. But in all seriousness, while we're on standby for the future of the Abyssal Hunters in the Seaborn, we can cover the current roster and what we know now, and maybe we'll revisit this in the future. As of now though, we can see the conditions and the thought process that made the Abyssal Hunters such a powerful faction as compared to the other factions. Their synergy goes beyond what the other factions are united for, either under the same organization or country. While other factions unite under a certain goal, the Abyssal Hunters were created to fight something that can bring about complete extinction. The Abyssal Hunters are not powerful for the sake of power, but because they have no choice but to be. Overpowered to the point of unfairness? Yes. Lore accurate? Also yes. With that, I think the Abyssal Hunter faction and their interplaying gameplay effects on one another is a Ludonarrative win. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. The Abyssal Hunter squad is definitely my favorite faction, not just because they're ultra reliable units for gameplay, but also because of how deep their lore is. But we're just scratching the surface here. In the next few parts, we'll be discussing each member of the Abyssal Hunter squad, starting with our resident psychopath, Spectre. Subscribe to me for more Lore and Ludonarrative videos or for gameplay and news on Arknights. I worked really hard on this and my eyes hurt from reading so much, so please like the video and share it with others who you think might enjoy it. Anyway, that's it for now, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!